The whole experience was a very emotional experience for him to save these people. And I mean, he was out in the streets risking his own life. He had my father, age 15, out there gathering the girls and women and getting them to save and feeding people, putting his own 15-year-old at risk. How many parents today would take a 15-year-old kid and put him out there in combat to save people whose names they didn't know, whose language they couldn't speak, they had no connection with them? Is that what it is to be a Christian? That's what we believe. And that is the really true quality of an American. Americans are different. Each country, each nation, I really should say, a nation and country are not the same, but each nation has its own distinguishing characteristics. And Americans have a distinguished characteristic, even though we're a melting pot. And Turks have a certain persona. The French have a persona. French are very different from Germans, and Germans are different from the British, and the three of them are very different from the Japanese. We each have our own persona. And if you're going to be successful, you have to understand all that. My grandfather understood that. But for him, it was a great emotional experience, and he was totally dedicated to it. And I will tell you that my grandmother, who was on one of those destroyers when the Americans were evacuated on September 13th, she went back to the States. Mentally, she had a breakdown. She was never the same, never able really to go back. I mean, you talk about people coming out of combat in Vietnam or any war and post-traumatic and all that stuff. That's what she suffered. But my grandfather just motored right through the whole thing because his purpose was so great. And he witnessed all this, but he still maintained his vision and his purpose, and it was the life of humanity. He cared about humanity. He didn't care whether you were a Greek or a Turk or Armenian or what you were. You were a human being, one of the children of God. That's all that mattered to him. So in any event, another thing we should talk about, you being from Iona, which is known for basketball, among other sports, and kids are interested in sports. What's the role of sports in all this? What do you think about sports? What is the purpose of sports? Is it just so I can say, I'm a big guy, I beat you, and you're a little guy because you lost? Is it for money? Why are we involved with sports? And my grandfather understood that. After the evacuation, the Greek government asked my grandfather to stay on for humanitarian work. He was asked by the king. And the Turkish government, led by Ataturk, asked him also, and he couldn't do both. The Greeks were a Western country, educated, many friends in the world. They had all the advantages. They were a trading country. The Turks had nothing. No maritime fleet, no industry. The country was destroyed. The people were not educated. The Muslims never believed in educating their children. So they were in real trouble. And all the businesses of the Ottoman Empire were owned by the minorities, the Greeks and the Armenians. They were not owned by the Turks. The Turks served in the military and the government. So when the minorities left, there was nobody to do anything. And the Turks for 700 years were used to being taken care of by the minorities. They want to sit in a coffee shop and smoke their nargileh and drink their tea or coffee. They don't want to work. Even in the 1950s, when I went to Turkey, you'd see the women working in the field, but the men are all in town, smoking their nargilehs and drinking their coffee or tea. They still weren't working, many of them, not all, but many of them. So they inherited that belief. So it was a real problem. So my grandfather decided to go with the Turks because they had the greater need. It wasn't a favoritism of Turk over Greek. It was where he felt he was more needed. So, and you're dealing with an authoritarian structure. You cannot confront the dictator. How do you operate? So what did he do? Well, first of all, the packing plants in Smyrna didn't have any employees to pack tobacco and olives and all the figs, all the other products. So my grandfather started the first daycare, and the people who ran the packing plants were happy to pay for that. And the thing about a Turkish woman for all these centuries stayed at home. She never left the home except when she was fully veiled. She had to be escorted by a male. She could not go on her own. She had no rights, and under Quranic law, the law of the Quran, a husband could divorce his wife simply by saying, I divorce thee, I divorce thee, I divorce thee, in the presence of witnesses, and she's out. She has no assets, she has nothing, just like Syria today and the other Muslim countries. So the women were just property. They were in a very poor condition. So in any event, they started the daycare, and they got the Turkish women to come in as employees. Well, women in the presence of other women can remove that head cover. They just cannot be seen by men. But women, that's okay. So the employees were Turkish women. They became the engine of the Turkish economy. And Turks today do not understand the role of the woman in Turkey and how the woman was so critical to the new Turkish Republic. So the women were working in these plants. Now they're going home with a paycheck. The husband didn't have a paycheck. The woman was getting paid. So now she had status in the family. She had status in society. Women created their own position in Turkey. Okay? And this did not go unnoticed by Gazi Mustafa Kemal. He could see what was going on. The next thing my grandfather did, Iona College, he built the first playground in Izmir, as the Turks call it, Smyrna, as the Greeks call it, Turkey. Very nice field. They had buildings to change into uniforms. And the organization that my grandfather created, the American Friends of Turkey, which was my grandfather was in charge. He had 2 Americans working for him, but the staff, the people dealt with, were Turkish citizens. So the people who were playing the sports were seeing Turks, not Americans. But the Americans laid down the rules, like what are the rules of playing soccer? So, what's a foul? And no coarse language is allowed, or you get kicked out. So they laid down the rules. And when the game is over, the 2 teams shake hands. That is very un-Muslim. Muslims don't believe in that. You do not lose if you're a Muslim, you kill. And an example was when the United States Army went into Afghanistan, there was a pickup basketball game. U.S. soldiers on one team, the Afghans on the other team, and the Americans started to win the game. And the Afghans went after the Americans trying to kill them. And people watching the basketball game intervened and broke up the fight. But that's their mentality. So by making the Turks shake hands, you're introducing the concept of tolerance. And this was very successful. The Turks liked playing soccer and other sports. And then they said, well, let's invite the ladies to play. Well, the mullahs went crazy. You're infecting Turkish society with these Western ideas. That's exactly what you hear in Iran today. Exactly what you hear in Iran today. It's a Muslim country. No tolerance. And the women in Iran are struggling. You'll see in the media Iranian women taking their head cover off, and then they get arrested. Women are second-class citizens in Iran, as they are in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. Try to go to Saudi Arabia and be a woman. Not good. So, in any event, women started to play the sports too, and they liked it. So there was this liberalization, and it was working. And it worked so well, ultimately, Ataturk did away with the Quran and the Caliphate, and they introduced Western laws that came from Italy and France and whatnot, and they changed the whole legal system in Turkey. Women got equal rights, and a man could no longer divorce his wife by saying, I divorce thee 3 times. So women are now equal. And when you think about it, that's half the population, all of whom are now contributing to the economy of Turkey. And it's also the diversification. All wars come from men. Men create wars, men prosecute wars. And now the women have an equal voice. It makes Turkey a much more peaceful place. And the proof is in the pudding. Turkey has stayed out of wars ever since. They have gone to Korea and some other wars as an ally at the request, but it was not a war created by the Turks. It's not like going into other countries like they once did. So Turkey today is totally different than what it was pre-1922.